Good afternoon and welcome. I call the fifth meeting of the Budget Sub-Review Committee for Primary and Secondary Education and Workforce Development to order. At this time, we'll have Amy call the roll.
Representative Baker. Representative Bojanowski.
Here.
Representative Lewis.
Here.
Representative Raymond. Here. Representative Riley. Here. Chair Banta.
Here. And I'm going to give members just a couple minutes to look over the minutes while I'm talking, and then someone can make a motion. We're going to go through slide by slide, and I'm going to allow questions because your information is so deep and so rich that I'm afraid if we get to the end, we have to back up and look at slides. So members, be aware that you can ask a question per slide, and we'll be watching for those questions, okay? All right, do I have a motion on the minutes? Thank you. Minutes are approved. And today we have the Kentucky Department of Education School Facilities Branch Review. We have representatives, and they will be presenting an overview of the school facilities branch. If these representatives will please come to the front and identify yourselves for the record.
Jay Ritter with the Department of Education.
ROBYN Kenny, Associate Commissioner, Office of Finance and Operations at the Kentucky Department of Education.
Okay, and Robin. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you so much for having us again. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We are going to do a high-level overview per your request of the KDE Facilities Branch. We're going to talk about KFIX, which is our inventory system, and the impact of two bills, House Bill 33 and House Bill 678. I'm going to let Che start us off, and then I'll join in a little later in the presentation.
Thank you. Once again, back here, thank you for having us again. We're going to talk a little bit about our facilities branch and jump into a program we have, which gets, as you said, into some pretty rich detail. And the further down the rabbit hole you go with this program, you'll find much more detail than you probably ever wanted to know, but it does help answer a lot of questions about our school facilities, and an incredibly important program for our districts. So the first slide here is just an overview of our facilities branch. Obviously with the Department of Education and Office of Finance and Operations, and the facilities branch really obviously stays under this operations, purview, and they reach out to every single school district to help with questions on not only facilities planning, but execution of construction and closing out these construction projects. There's a long list of things this group does every day. It's changed somewhat, which Robin will talk about with House Bill 678. But ideally, we are in direct contact with districts, architects, construction managers all across the state. Every district, small and large, will typically have a project or many projects at once. So this is where we hopefully can help them get through that process as quickly and painlessly as possible. So in that branch, we have 4 project managers. These are all design professionals, either architects or something like that, a resource management analyst, and 1 branch manager. Right now, there are 1,930 active projects, and these go back quite a ways in the years. And it doesn't mean that they're not done. It's just they haven't closed out these projects for one reason or another. And I will tell you just from my experience, and I see it, there's a superintendent in the room too, these projects will open and usually stay open for several years because of the nature of construction, delays, and even when they're finished, they're not quite finished yet. So they also work with property transactions, and these are incredibly important because this is part of that planning process. Districts need to buy land, and there's a lot of issues that we work through with land. There's easements, road adequacy. You want to make sure, obviously, the land you're buying does not have some kind of fault line underneath it or sinkholes and things like that. So the branch has been very effective at helping districts buy land that's appropriate for use. Of course, size is important too. There's this campus model where you stack schools in one area, or in some counties, especially rural, where you can have much more space. You may have schools all over the county, and so that's where our branch can step in as well. They also work on something that's very important with district facility planning. And what this is that every 4 years or so, districts submit a district facility plan, which involves a local planning committee. and the local school board. So it's two groups, and they will work through this process of updating their plan. No different than your house when you walk around and say, I probably need a new roof in a couple years. I'm going to need to upgrade my HVAC system and things like that, but on a much larger scale. This helps populate what we call need and unmet need. And you'll hear this closer to budget time when SFCC, who's sitting behind me here, will talk about that a little bit, I'm sure. It's a very important part of this process. We want to have accurate data there. And of course, provide training and support. This is becoming more and more of an important role of that branch, is to be face-to-face with districts or virtual, to provide training over statutes, regulations, and processes.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Yes, ma'am.
Has the comprehensive review facilities regulations, has that streamlined a little bit so that districts have a little bit easier time getting through the process?
Yes, it has. So ROBYN will speak on House Bill 678. That was last session. It has, I will say, dramatically shifted a lot of the, what I'd call kind of that bottleneck, if you will, has shifted that or kind of squeezed it out, and it has sped up the processes quite a bit. The impact to the branch is they have a lot less work. The review process, I believe, for districts is much more fluid and easy. And so we've sort of shifted the responsibility back to the districts and the local school boards instead of, the compliance issues that we used to review for. But absolutely, it has sped up those processes.
Okay, excellent. And when you say you provide the training, how many people participate in that training?
So it varies. Initially, I've been director over 2 years or so. So I started during COVID, and we would do virtual trainings. We would have fairly decent attendance of anywhere from, I'd say, 20 to 80 people. We've not quite stretched ourselves out to go back out to the districts yet because we're trying to develop some curriculum at this time, a little bit different curriculum, sort of a better path to, this is the training in the order we want you to take it in. I will be honest, it is a huge learning curve. If you're a new superintendent, I would venture to say that if you've not dealt with facilities, it's a very big part of your job once you step into that role, as well as finance officers too. Of course, architects. These are independent architects that work on courthouses and office buildings, and then the school districts are going to be a little bit different. So I think we have a large audience and the opportunities there to actually provide training to a lot more people. Our connection with the K groups, KSBA, we just did a training up there, I would say a couple weeks ago on a Saturday. We may have had 40 school board members in there.
Topics include?
Topics include planning, execution, construction. And one of the bigger, not to dive too deep in the details, but is a planning guide that the department uses, which is incorporated into a regulation. And it talks about spaces. And that's one of the updates we're doing through a regulation review. Since probably 2008 or 2013 or 8, I'm sorry, I forget the year when it was last updated, a lot has changed in the design world. What we had back then was very different than what we need today. So we've been working with districts, architects, construction managers to revamp that guide so that building these new schools, we have much more concern about school safety, obviously, now than we did many years ago, school health. Frisky offices, different types of spaces that quite simply didn't exist years ago. Okay. Collaboration areas and things like that of that nature as well.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as with any good government program, you have to have an acronym. I'm not sure if that's law, but we'll treat it as such. KFIX, Kentucky Facilities Inventory and Classification System. This gets tossed around quite a bit out in the districts. It's been in place now for quite a while. But there is a statutory requirement that we standardize the process. And this report is available online, and typically we'll provide it to the General Assembly, I believe in October before the budget. So it's coming up several months from now. There will be an updated report. However, in the interim, we do provide updates basically on a monthly basis, so you can always go out and check. It is available online. It's a very large spreadsheet with a lot of data, but very important data for school districts as well.
And what KRS, excuse me, I'm sorry, but what KRS addresses the standardized process for evaluating school districts?
157.420, Section 9. And I believe in an earlier copy, it was 159, Representative. Is that what you have on your
That's
sheet?
it, yes.
Yeah,
I had
it should be
159.
157, I'm sorry.
So
We
it's
did correct that
157.
later, but didn't get you a
Okay,
copy.
thank you.
So basically the goal here is to be based on measurable and objective criteria. So when we look at K-Fix, to be clear, KDE is not going out to the buildings and doing this. These are typically going to be third-party architects, and in some cases the districts will have their own staff do this work. It's sort of a mixed bag if you want to, sort of contract it out to your architect. One benefit of that is, being current on ADA standards, or American Disabilities Act, and, certain issues that are newer that your staff may not be aware of. But should be a comprehensive review of life safety issues. I'll just go over a few of these to save some time. Instructional areas, obviously the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, things of that nature, the age of the buildings, the feasibility of additions and renovations. Obviously, if you're really squeezed in an area, in an independent district, there's stuff kind of packed around you, and down the street at Frankfort High, you may not be able to do an addition because you just don't have the land. And out in the middle of Graves County, you may have 20 acres to build on. So they have very different concerns. The capacity of these facilities. One of the things we really stress with districts is look at how you're using the buildings. A 600 student school that's got 700 students in it, it's very tight squeeze. But alternatively, you may have schools that have much less of a population in there as well. And then very important too is the projected enrollment growth, because we're building for the future. There is a process that gets into some planning about when they develop their district facility plan to project their enrollment growth appropriately using some studies so that they're not overbuilding or underbuilding for that matter.
Okay, I have in my area, a lot of districts really rely on local building, the local. So can you just give me a cost factor for K-Fix? Like, how much does the department cost the legislator a year?
How much does the program cost a school district?
No. How much does it cost? How much does it cost the state to have it?
The appropriation is $600,000. That is from the General Assembly to operate the system itself.
Okay. Any other questions so far? Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So some of you may remember the Parsons report. You've probably heard that name if you've been around long enough to talk about school facilities. This was a sort of a one-time report, but it was not ongoing. It was not. It wasn't dynamic, and it was sort of a snapshot in time to rank schools based on their conditions. And out of that report came some additional funding for what was termed Category 5 buildings. And I believe there were 10 or 11 districts that received some of that funding back then. And it was very specific to those buildings. So in 2016, House Bill 303 provided some budget funding for K-Fix. This is, again, an objective assessment, including processes to collect, integrate, and maintain assessment data. But very important on the back end is this quality assurance. This is basically our version of we're internally testing the data to make sure it's accurate as much to the extent possible. Our project managers, who are licensed professionals, are kind of coming in behind them and reviewing it as well to make sure the data we're getting is accurate. That's very important to us, as these reports will be used, obviously, by the General Assembly, as well as school districts when they go to plan and go through their local planning committee. This public-facing data, we want it to obviously be accurate. So some interesting numbers, a little bit over 1,400 buildings in there. Now, to be clear, this system is not, we don't require the use by districts. We've got 132 districts that have participated in this so far. We always politely want more, but it's not mandatory at this time. There are about, the next report will be October in 2023. And let me grab a note real quick, just some additional, 78 million gross square feet in these reports. So a lot of buildings in these reports. And the average age of these buildings is about 46 years or so.
Can I ask? I'm just going to keep jumping
That's
in.
fine. That's fine.
How is it that districts with 100-year-old building fall through and they don't get rated low enough to have a replacement?
That is a frequent question that we get. And so in some cases, when I get a call that says, well, I was ranked 32 a month ago and the new report came out and I'm now 76, something like that. So as this process goes on month to month, we're adding more and more buildings. So it fluctuates, if you will. And one sort of short answer to that is the maintenance of that building. And if you have a 100-year-old building, and let's just kind of compare an apple to an apple, two districts with 100-year buildings, the quality of the construction, obviously, 100 years ago makes a difference. Renovations that they've done makes a difference, and I think as well as their maintenance. If districts put additional funding in the maintenance of these buildings, it will obviously keep that building in great shape, but at the same time it does arguably hurt them as far as getting a lower ranking, if you will. But I think too, as these more schools come online to this report, it will push some of these districts' buildings back and forth. And that's a frequent complaint and one that we take very seriously. We've had some of our staff review the same situations in other districts to make sure, is this calibrated correctly? And we may review the work that the third-party architect did to say, is this accurate? And that's one reason we continue to do the quality assurance. We want to make sure everyone's on the same playing field to the extent possible and have accurate data as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So benefits, of course, this is district level inventory. This is not us in Frankfurt, kind of guessing at how a building is, conditioned. This is, like I said, public facing. So any constituent can see this data out there, and I think there's great value, especially when you start a planning process. When Franklin County or Frankfurt Independent starts their planning process, being informed is going to accelerate that process and help them make really good decisions on where they want the next couple of years to go with their facilities. Some of the challenges, incomplete information. This is a challenge anytime you collect data, and investment in time and resources, aka money. Some districts are reluctant to do this because of the cost. It will vary by district, but some we've spoken to saw once they got into it, there was incredible value. And as a larger district, obviously, with an inventory system of your buildings, I imagine Jefferson, Fayette, Boone, all that data at your touch of your fingertips is a really good thing to have, of course, too. And before I could jump to the next slide, did anyone have any questions? I just want to ask Representative Banta, Chair.
I think you're okay.
Okay, thank you. So the next topic is just House Bill 33. This was last session. Representative Branscombe introduced this bill and it passed. This was a couple things inside this bill. One was the Efficient School Design Trust Fund. This basically became obsolete over time, so it was removed. Another one was some reporting requirements that were in statute for efficient school design. The architects working with the districts, obviously efficiency is a huge factor in the design of these buildings. That includes geothermal, solar, all kinds of different things that they're now applying, much more modern than the statute was at the time. This also, I think there was an amendment that pushed in some language that would allow local review of the construction. Instead of housing buildings constructions in Frankfurt, that would allow some counties to do local review, which would accelerate that process. And the one that's a little odd in here is the water bottle filling stations. And it's not that we were anti-water bottle filling stations, but we had this in two places. It is in the building code, so they are required to put it in, but it was also in statute. So this is just simply kind of getting rid of duplicative language. And this also saved us quite a bit of time in the facilities branch, which again allowed us to be a little more efficient with our time as it comes to reviewing, building plans, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Banta and members of the committee, we're now going to talk about House Bill 678. House Bill 678 was passed in the last General Assembly session and really changed the way that the Kentucky Department of Education interacts with our local school districts. It did pass with an emergency clause, and the reason that 678 was so important at the time that it was passed, it was really in response to sort of the delay that was impacting construction projects at your local districts and increasing costs that were happening as a result of that while we were waiting on approvals to happen. So as of 3/1/2023, 153 districts have adopted and operate under the provisions of House Bill 678. So the vast majority of our districts are now operating in that manner, which means they don't have to come to KDE for certain approvals in advance. So it's really helped with the efficiency and expedited the process at the local level. all the statutes and regs that are currently in place in the facilities world for local school districts, they still have to be followed. It really is just a shift of that responsibility and accountability and the decision-making process more to the district level in certain areas. And that affects construction, when you're starting your financing, renovation or modification of any of your district facility projects. Of course, KDE is still available to provide technical assistance and guidance to any districts that are operating under 678. And for those few districts that have chosen not to do that, we still operate in the former process where they come to us, they bring us certain information, and we kind of pre-approve those elements and steps along the way. It's that second set of eyes for them that they don't feel, maybe they're not even ready to do construction projects, or they're a little uncomfortable in doing it themselves.
Has that changed your, with 153 districts adopting 678, that's huge. So have you changed your department? What has changed in your department since that many are relying on their
Yes. So the biggest portion of what we continue to work on with our facility staff right now is the requirement under 678 for us to do a comprehensive review of all our statutes, our regulations, our processes, our manuals. And so that's taken a lot of our staff time, which luckily we could devote to that instead of doing the pre-approvals for our local school districts. So 678 did both of those at the same time, shifted responsibility to the local school districts, and freed up time for us to really do this comprehensive review.
Do you have an end date for those manuals?
Actually, the 678 also requires a report back to the General Assembly in September of this year. And so right now, we're going through that process, and I'll quickly get to the sort of where we are in our steps. Also, as part of 678, we do have a requirement that we have 30 business days to approve completed district facility plans and requests for acquisition of property or just disposal of that property. And on this slide, you can see we are averaging about 8.9 days for the approval of DFPs and 10.4 days for property acquisition. So that's a piece that 678 still had us actively participating in, but just gave us a 30 business day deadline to make sure that those were happening. BG1s, which are the documents that come to the department, really defining the scope of the project, the funding for the project. In the past, we were also approving those, but we no longer do that. Instead, they are just filed with us for record keeping and data collection. So we're not reviewing any of that for compliance with the statutes and regs. Another important piece of 678 is it allowed extracurricular facilities to be access restricted funds, and that was something that was not permitted before 678. We really see that as a benefit to our local school districts in addressing really the whole child and being able to use those funds to address extracurricular facilities that they previously were using their own funds for. Lastly, KDE still has to prior approve any projects that are using federal funds, and this is specifically true with the coronavirus relief funds. The federal acts require a prior approval of those projects by KDE, so we still do approve those in advance.
Do you have, are districts aware of what is on the list to be approved? Do they understand what it takes to be approved, or?
For the use of federal funds?
Yeah, how do you determine that?
Yeah, so with all the federal funding that's coming, not only for facilities, but for other operations of the federal funds, it has to be related to either protect, prevent, or respond to the coronavirus pandemic. So that's number one in order to use those funds. Number two, you have to be reasonable and necessary in your costs, and you also have to follow the Uniform Code guidance on expenditure of funds. So these are things that districts, those other two things are things that they are very familiar with in the use of funds at the federal level. 678 also gave us a scope of review. So that is, Chair, to your question, what is our staff doing so much right now? 678 set a scope of review for us to look at all the processes and procedures, the regs, the statutes, the manuals. and to identify needed updates due to changes in the facility design, how we operate our schools, and the construction industry and the economy. Also, we were asked to look at the most commonly granted waivers. School districts prior to 678 and even now can come to us and ask for a waiver from the regulations as long as it doesn't impact safety or health. And so we have 3 of the most commonly granted waivers that we have looked at, and as we have looked at the comprehensive review, we've tried to build in things to help correct the need for those waivers. Those included site acquisition and prep exceeding 10% of the project cost, project exceeding 120 of the total square footage, and access of those restricted funds to extracurricular activities, which we've already talked about. So that was in 678. We are also in the process of reviewing all those procedures. We are also asked to consult with Housing, Building, and Construction to really see if there is any duplication of our services. So we've done that. And then there, September 1st, 2023, we are to submit a written report to LRC and to include any recommended changes to consider in the 2024 regular session. So what have we been doing? I'm sorry.
No. I'm interrupting you.
Okay.
So any chance you guys can let local school districts in their land acquisition decide for themselves and kind of eliminate that from your scope?
So House Bill 421, actually, that's been filed this session, and is sort of like a phase 2 of 678 and contemplates removing that prior approval from KDE for property acquisitions. We would encourage districts to be very cautious about that because we want to make sure that districts really appreciate sort of the statutes and the regs and all the requirements you need to look at when you purchase property. So we are recommending that the training component is very, very important in order for all the statutes and regs, but specifically about purchase of property. We don't want our districts to get in a situation where they purchase some property and then down the road they realize that there's something that might be detrimental to the local school district.
Thank you.
We have gone through, we are currently still in a review process. We're soliciting input and feedback from lots of different groups that you see on the screen. We convened a local school district work group in the summer of 2021. Then 678 came in the spring of 2022. We have been going through this review, and we recently, in February, reconvened that facilities local school district work group. Talked to them about our recommendations, got feedback from them again, and then Che and I are going to really be on a road show over the next several months, sharing sort of recommendations and continuing to receive feedback.
Okay, Representative Lewis has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple things. Can you talk about transitional facilities just a little bit? Is that still since I've been gone in 18, is that still on the books?
You want to talk about
Can you talk
transition?
about that just a little?
Sure. So as part of that planning process, I'll choose Franklin County just because it's in my backyard, but as they look at their schools, some are going to be, tagged as permanent, some will be tagged as transitional, meaning as time goes, they expect to eventually close that school or consolidate schools, or in some cases, the population may not support that large of a building, and that consolidation conversation has to occur at the district. Obviously, if it's some elementaries, if you've got too many of those and you can consolidate, they're looking for obviously efficiencies with respect to, parents and where they live and how long is the student on the bus and things like that. But that is still part of that process of they will select if these buildings are permanent or transitional.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
House Bill 678, to your question again, has been really beneficial, we think, for local school districts as well as for the department. And so you'll see coming out of our recommendations, we are supportive of permanent statutory revisions to effectuate a lot of the provisions of 678. 678 is scheduled right now to expire in September of 2024. So we are proposing some of those provisions become more permanent. Including them continuing to operate under those provisions, which will allow them to move forward with funding and construction renovations and modifications. However, you'll see there's a phrase at the end of that first bullet. We do think appropriate professional development of our district staff is really important. They will be operating sort of without any review at the state level, and so we feel it's important that they are treated as the professionals that they are, and they receive that appropriate training in order to operate in the facilities world. And you can see on the slide, in the interest of time, there are other things that we really think are good about House Bill 678 and would recommend that they continue. As I said, we have some next steps. We will appear in front of the local superintendent's advisory council on March 28th and talk to them about our recommendations. And then we'll go back in front of them again in a meeting prior to the June KBE meeting. This allows them to give us input and feedback, and then we can come back to them with those opportunities incorporated into our recommendations going forward. We'll also be in front of the Kentucky Board of Education on June 6th and 7th. And then, of course, that report that comes to the General Assembly on September 1st, 2023. At any time, superintendents are encouraged to reach out to us. We have posted our work group recording and sort of the summary minutes from that on our KDE website so that they can see what the work group has already reported back to us. Trying to just give as many opportunities for our local school district to provide input and weigh in on this issue. It's a really important issue. It's a lot of work, and we're just trying to reach the best result for both the Department of Education and our local school districts when it comes to facilities.
I do have one more question, and then I'm going to stop, I promise. But there's something, and I apologize, I've got a text, something called special projects. How are those identified for funding?
So that's probably referring to special offers of assistance. And so part of KFIX, and again, this is a function of the General Assembly, typically, right during the budget session. If you can look through the budget bill, you'll see a list of the districts that are getting special offers of assistance, which are sent through the School Facilities Construction Commission sitting behind me here. Part of the input to that decision is the ranking in KFIX. Another option is to look at how many tax nickels the district has restricted for facilities. So you may get some questions from your local districts about, well, we've done KFIX and here's where we're ranked. Are we low enough to get a special offer of assistance? And, we just basically provide that information, and they may determine that they're looking at buildings that are over 40 years old that meet the remainder of this criteria. They've got an extra nickel, and they've already got a project or plan in place, and they have the land ready to go. There's all these conditions you could certainly add to that, but I believe that's what they're referring to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Bojanowski.
Okay, so it's not really specific to your presentation, but it is specific to facilities. So I'm going to talk about bathrooms. And it's my understanding that Fayette County has a new school being built that has a different sort of design for the bathrooms. The number of hours that teachers have to spend that could be used for instructional minutes, taking children as a group to the restroom. And then, I don't know why boys want to play in the boys' room, but there's always something going on. But it's my understanding in the design at the Fayette County School is that it's more of a universal design. So each child can go in an individual closed stall, but then the washing your hands area is a community area. So, whether it's a boys' room or a girls' room, it doesn't matter because each person's going in one individual enclosed shut door stall. Do you have any thoughts on that? I know that there are regulations and so forth. When we built our gymnastics facility, we had to do certain different things with bathrooms. But as a teacher, to be able to stand and see all your kids except the one who's in the stall with the door shut and then come out would just be quite a blessing.
So I'm not a design professional, nor should I ever pretend to be. I don't really have any comments on that other than I think as a department, we're more concerned if it meets code. That's very important. Obviously, fire safety, life stuff, health health is another thing we look at. As we work through this regulation process and our planning manual, and I strongly encourage you, it is a hard read, the planning manual, and if you get into the construction manual, it's even harder of a read, but you see the process of how these buildings are meant to be. If you think of a box with many little boxes in it, and there's some, you need 300 square feet for this type of room, and as a school is being designed, there's conversations taking place locally with their architect and school board to say, with our experience, we really would like X, whatever X is. We really want collaborative areas for teachers and students. And the design professionals, being the professionals they are, can come up with some very interesting things and offers to the school board to think about. They'll look at, obviously, other schools in the state, but also out of state. I know, driving by a couple of these schools, Eminence, for example, did something very interesting with their library that I had not seen before. And thinking back to my school, our library was basically a square room, and that was it. It was very utilitarian, and that's just how it is. But I think as part of that planning process, that's why you need public engagement. You need that professional engagement as well as local school board engagement, and get the type of school that you want. And we would obviously support that local decision making to say this is how we want to build our school. And that's why I think in our upcoming regulation changes, at least the proposed ones, we've added a lot more flexibility in that process. It was a little too prescriptive, in my opinion. We're sort of handcuffed to keep the design professionals from really having too much latitude, and I hope we've kind of moved the needle the other way, so there's a lot more flexibility in there. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you for your
much.
presentation. That was awesome. Thank you. Now we have representatives from the School Facilities Construction Commission, and they will be presenting an overview of their agency. If you guys could come forward and introduce yourselves.
Thank you all for having me.
Yep, green button has to be really green.
Thank you for having us. I'm Chelsea Couch with the School Facilities Construction Commission.
I'm Christy Russell with the School Facilities Construction Commission.
This morning or this afternoon, we're just going to give a very brief overview of the SFCC and some of our latest appropriations in the last two budget sessions. We are an office of 2 people. You're looking at the entire office. We have a 9-person commission, and together we help with the funding of all the school facilities in the state. So the SFCC provides debt service support to school districts for the construction and renovation of the school facilities. We have participated in nearly 2,600 bond issues since our inception, totaling $12 billion. Currently, we have about $1.2 billion in that debt outstanding. Fiscal year 23, we've issued $209 million so far in bonds, of which we're making payments of $95 million in principal and $27 million in interest. Our funding is based, like Shay said, on the district's unmet facility need, and that is essentially just the gap between what the construction is going to cost versus what their local resources are to pay for those capital projects. In order to help fill the gap, we seek legislative appropriations each year to pay our share of the debt. So in January of 2022, we were given $58 million for offers of assistance to be distributed among the 171 districts. For January of 2024, we will be giving out $85 million in those special offers of assistance. As you can see, for 2021, the total unmet school facility need was $6.1 billion. That is a statewide unmet facility need. That is a number that the Department of Education produces each biennium, and the next report will be available this fall. Just to kind of give you an overview of what we're seeing as far as construction-wise, you can see I've put, different school facilities, their square footage, and the price per square foot. Obviously, everyone knows contractors are experiencing record price increases for different materials, supply chain issues. That's definitely causing some financial strain on these districts. I think the saving and the planning phase is becoming much longer. Just for a comparison, in June of 2020, we built a new elementary school in Bardstown. It was 92,000 square feet, and we built it for $210 a square foot. You can see the price increase just over a few years. Right now, we're seeing anywhere between $425 and $475 a square foot. That is one reason our debt issuance has slowed. For this fiscal year, we've issued less than 20 issuances, which is very small for us compared to just 2 years ago, we were more than 40. This is just kind of a snapshot of what we see with these bonds. We are general fund supported debt. We enter into participation agreements with these school districts. So the bonds are not actually issued in the state's name, it's issued in the school district's name. And we just provide the debt service support for our portion. All of our bonds are a 20-year term. We have 2 payments on every bond that issues. And I kind of broke that down just for this specific scenario. It was a $38 million bond, and you can see the district's portion for this year and what we will be paying this year on that specific bond. You can also see I gave you a snapshot of interest rates, which is also another reason debt issuance has slowed. Just in a year, you can see February of 2022, we were issuing at 275, and now I don't think I've seen below 4 in more than 6 months. And that's a big difference for $38 million projects. I mean, you think about your mortgages and house rates, it's crazy what they're seeing right now. So when we talk about some of the special offers of assistance, so the legislature appropriated $75 million in 2021 to local area vocational education centers. These are local operated centers. The SFCC board voted on these projects. So just to give you an update, they're all moving forward. Some are in the design phase. A few have issued bonds and have started construction. A couple of them are also doing cash projects and not issuing debt. This is an appropriation that is based upon the KFIX report that Jay and Robin talked about. It's $196 million. All districts have received their funding. They received it last summer. And they are also either in the design phase. Very few have sold bonds on this list. And again, another $155 million that was appropriated for local area vocational centers. This legislation was a little different this time around. It did require districts to contribute 10% of the total project cost with local funding, whether that be local cash, general fund, or local bonds that they can sell on their own. All these projects are all moving forward. Most of the money has gone out, but we still have a few stragglers that we're waiting for BG1s and different things so we can see their sources of funding to send that money. And lastly, this was the last appropriations. They were just special appropriations that were written in the budget. Both of these projects have begun.
Gonna interrupt you. How many of these school districts have a gap that you awarded money to have a gap due to inflation because of construction?
I would say all of them at this point. I think that's why most of them, they've received the money, but the projects aren't starting as quickly because you're seeing interest rates have almost doubled in a year's time. Construction rates are up $160 in less than 2 years a square foot. So,
but they had the money before the inflation and decided not to go?
They did not have this money before the inflation.
Okay.
So they just got this money last summer, so right in the heat of things when everything's starting to rise. Now they did, so when we did factor these in, so they had to apply for this money and they sent in applications and their local revenues that they had on hand were factored into this money.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Representative Lewis.
Just one question, maybe a statement too, but can you talk a little bit, school districts, sometimes you're talking about bonding. School districts will build, and their bond may be 4%. 2 or 3 years down the road, you may be able to bond for 2.5 or something, and it's just another way for school districts to save on a project that they've already done. Can you touch a little bit on that?
So refinancing is a big thing in the bond world. We have not seen any in probably the last year and a half. I don't know that we've seen one because rates keep increasing, but that is definitely something that districts can take advantage of when rates come back down.
Okay. No further questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very informative. Got a lot going on with people in the middle of construction, and it's a mess. Yes, ma'am. So thank you. Thank you. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Thank you. We are adjourned.